and Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator for Iraq, and she'll brief you on the situation there. We don't have the picture up yet, but I think we have her on the line. Ms. Grande, are you there on the other end?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. We'll get started. Oh, and we see you as well. Excellent. Great. If you have any remarks to say first, let's start with you before we go to questions then.
Would you like me to go ahead and give the briefing, or after your introduction, what's convenient?
I think we're ready for you right now. If you can say your bit, and then the spokesman's briefing will happen later after you're all done with your part.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to have the chance to address you today. On Thursday evening, the government issued a recommendation to the civilians who are trapped inside the old city of Mosul. And the recommendation asked civilians to flee their homes and cross into safety on the other side of government lines. This was a significant change in the guidance that the government had been providing to civilians up until that point. The military campaign to retake Mosul started 7 months ago, started in mid-October. And during the entire operation, the government has been advising civilians that they should stay in their home. The government's been saying our security forces will do absolutely everything we can to protect you in your homes, we'll protect your families, and we'll protect your property. So on Thursday evening, when they issued this new instruction, it represented a dramatic change and shift from the guidance that they had previously been providing. We are not on the ground in the areas where the fighting is occurring in Mosul, so we don't know for sure how many civilians are trapped. But our understanding is that as many as 200,000 civilians are still in the areas that are controlled by ISIL. Most of Mosul has been liberated. All of the eastern part of the city has been liberated, and the overwhelming majority of the western districts have been retaken. There are 3 neighborhoods just to the north of the old city where fighting is still occurring. The fighting, we understand, is very intense. And then there is the old city itself. As I said, if you combine the 3 districts and the old city, we estimate that there are 100,000 civilians who are trapped. We are deeply concerned about the safety of these civilians. In fact, we feel that those civilians are probably at greater risk now than at any stage of the entire campaign. It's extremely difficult for civilians to leave the old city. It's completely encircled. There's a wall around it. There are snipers which are positioned, ISIL snipers that are positioned on the entrances in and out of the city, and very, very few families have managed to make it out. Those who have tell us horror stories about conditions inside. We understand that there are very limited food stocks. The entire water system in the old city is not functioning. The entire sewage system in the old city is not functioning. There are some hospitals we understand which are functioning, but what the families who have made it out tell us is that those facilities are only open to ISIL fighters and to their families. So civilians are not able to access those facilities. We know that there are widespread shortages of medicines. People suffering from chronic diseases, diabetes, and so forth, have not had access to medicines for months and months. We don't know when the security forces will begin to breach into the old city, but it could happen in just a few days. It depends upon how intense, how fierce the fighting is in those 3 districts that abut onto the northern entrances. Right now, the humanitarian operation is at a tipping point. When we started planning for Mosul a year ago, right now, this was when Fallujah was taken, right at this time, and that's when we began to do serious planning for Mosul. We developed 3 scenarios: a best-case scenario, a most likely case, and a worst-case scenario. The worst-case scenario for Mosul was that 1 million civilians would be impacted and 750,000 civilians would need our direct assistance. As of today, 774,000 civilians have fled the city. We are providing assistance, direct assistance to all of those people and to the more than 500,000 civilians on the eastern side of the city who did not flee their homes during the fighting. They stayed there. We're providing assistance to them as well. In other words, Based on our own scenario planning, we are at the moment staring our worst case scenario straight in the face. Now, we know that in the next few days, next few weeks, an additional 200,000 civilians are likely to flee. In the past several weeks, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of people who are fleeing towards safety out of the West. On average, there are about 10,000 civilians who are leaving every single day. Some days it reaches 15,000, 16,000. In our planning right now for the evacuation of the old city, we're estimating that the number of people who leave per day is likely to be at the peak, probably 15,000, 16,000. We are, however, developing contingency plans for a worst case, which would envision as many as 40,000 civilians leaving each day. When civilians leave through the safe routes that the Iraqi security forces identified, they cross government lines, and when they do that, they are taken by holding forces to mustering points. There are 3 mustering points on the western side of the city. There are now 2 bridges that link the western part of Mosul to the eastern part, and there are 2 mustering points on the eastern side of the city as well. When civilians arrive in the mustering points, this is where humanitarian partners are first there. We provide shading, emergency water, emergency medical triage. We provide food boxes for families, and we also have protection teams that are there. We also have highly trained, specialized mobile teams that provide the first line of support for the victims of sexual and gender-based violence. From the mustering points, families are transported by the government to screening sites. When they arrive at the screening sites, the men are after they pass screening, the families can choose where they want to go. They can go into emergency camps. These are run both by the UN and by the government. Or they can choose to stay with family and friends. Many of them choose to stay with community groups, stay in mosques, and there are some, those who have more means, who do choose to find their own accommodation. Right now, there are 19 emergency camps that ring Mosul. Many of those camps are completely full, although we do at present have space available at a pinch to take 50,000 people. As has been the case for the past several months, we are constructing nonstop more spaces. By the 1st of June, there will be an additional 25,000 spaces available, and then within the next 7 days, there will be another 15,000 spaces available. That means that roughly within the next 10 days, we should have room for 90,000 people. If there are more people who come out, unfortunately, we will not have the space, and the only option will be for these families to stay either with their friends or with family members, or to seek their own accommodation, or to stay in mosques and other community buildings. Throughout the Mosul operation, we've been struggling to stay one step ahead. We have managed so far, but I think all of the humanitarian partners now are deeply concerned about the protection of the civilians who are trapped, and we're deeply concerned about whether, if there is a mass outflow of people in the next few days, whether or not we can still continue to cope. We're going to do everything we can to stay on top of it, but if you look at the numbers and the speed at which they may come out, we may struggle to do that. There have been a series of emergency meetings since Thursday when we understood that the government was taking this decision, and as I said, we are doing our very best to pre-position stocks in the mustering points and to, again, keep building as many spaces as we can in the 19 camps which surround Mosul. If I can say finally just a few words about how we understand the operation on the ground will occur, the evacuation. The Iraqi security forces have said that they will be opening safe routes. In other words, based on what is happening on the ground in the fighting, when space or when there is an opening, the fighters will say to the civilians, okay, this is where we want you to go. And they will help the civilians to escape. When the civilians come out of those safe routes, there will be holding soldiers who are holding ground. They will then receive the families who are coming, and they will be the ones who bring them to the mustering points where the humanitarian partners will be there to receive them and provide them with the first line of assistance before they move to the screening sites and then onward to the emergency camps. What this means is that we will not know where the safe routes are. They will change depending upon the realities on the ground and kinetically what's happening in the actual battle. We get asked very often why we think the government has made this decision. Throughout the entire operation, the government has adopted a humanitarian concept of operation. This puts civilian protection at the center of their battle plan. I think until very recently, they felt that the very safest option for families was to stay in their homes. Now, what the Iraqi security forces are signaling is that they believe the safest option for the civilians in the old city is for them to leave. The evacuation notice is not compulsory, and that means that the civilians who choose to stay in the old city will be protected by the Iraqi security forces. They will not be targets, they will be protected, and the forces will do everything they can to ensure that they survive. If you allow me just a final observation about our funding, the Iraq humanitarian appeals, unlike many in the world, have been very generously funded by member states and donors. For the past 2 years, they have been, in percentage terms, some of the highest funded appeals in the world. These are also appeals which are the most highly prioritized. Very often in appeals, there are lots of things that partners ask for. In the case of Iraq, we ask for only the minimum necessary to ensure that there is a basic emergency package for the civilians. What that means is that if we ask for a certain amount, this year we asked for $984 million, we need all of that. If we ask for $980 million, that doesn't mean that we need, anything less than that. So we are very grateful that we have received a very high percentage of funding, but again, we do have the most highly prioritized appeals in the world. This year, so far, we have received a little over 30% of what we've asked for. Already, we are facing the closure of a number of frontline health facilities, and we are worried that if we don't receive more funding, that our ability to support the civilians who are at extreme risk, who are now going to be coming out, we assume in very large numbers from the old city, will be compromised. We'd like to leave the briefing at that, and we're very pleased to take questions.
We'll now open the floor for questions. Please identify yourselves to our speaker. Yes, Pam.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grande, for the brief. CBS News. My question, no?
No, we got you.
You got it. Okay. My question is, you said there are 200,000 civilians within the ISIS-held territory, but 90,000 that you can take care of at this point, and that the rest would stay in some kind of protected areas. But what do you anticipate doing if there's a mass crisis and a refugee crisis with civilians leaving, since the bombings of this morning, and the retaking of the city?
It's a very important question. What we have space for are in the emergency camps and sites. And just to put this into perspective, right now there are about 320,000 civilians who are in those 19 emergency camps. There are another 280,000 people who have come out of Western Mosul who are not in those camps. They're staying with friends, they're staying with families, they're staying in mosques, they're staying with community groups, or else they've managed to find their own accommodation, usually by renting it. So what we're saying is that in those emergency camps, we can take another 90,000 people. Our working assumption is that if all 200,000 of the estimated civilians who are in the old city do come out, half of them will be in the camps, and roughly half of them will be accommodated in other locations. The civilians who are staying with family or friends or staying in mosques, they do have access to humanitarian assistance. For example, UNICEF is water trucking in every single day more than 2 million liters of safe drinking water, and much of that water goes to areas outside of the camps where resident families need help and where IDPs who are staying with those friends and families also require assistance. So we have support that we provide in camps, and we also have mobile support that we're providing to the families who are outside of the camps. And again, our working assumption is that in a worst case right now, if all 200,000 come out, half will be in the camps and half will be in with family and friends and in community buildings.
Thank you, Ms. Grande, for the briefing. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the daily Al Quds Al Arabi. And I have two questions. The first, there is a news saying that the Popular Mobilization Force has put a foothold in the Ninawa governorate, connecting Mosul area with the Syrian border. What do you say to that? Is it true, and what does that mean? And the second, you have mentioned before that before admitting the civilians into the camps, there is a process of verification where Iraqi security interview those civilians coming to the camps. And you said you were not there to witness how is the process being done and if there is any violation of human rights. How is the situation now? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. The United Nations is not present in the locations that you described, the stretches of territory between Mosul and the Syrian border. So we are not in a position to comment on the first question you asked, but if you allow us to share the following. In March, the Popular Mobilization Forces were called upon to start providing humanitarian assistance by the Marja'iyya. And a number of the Popular Forces responded to this call and started to enter into the humanitarian, into the emergency camps to provide aid. In the early days, they came in armed. This was very threatening for the civilians. We engaged with the Iraqi government on this, and the Prime Minister issued an order demilitarizing all emergency sites and camps. So the only people that enter these camps now are unarmed. There's no militarization of them. When we have instances of where this occurs, we immediately report it to the government and the security forces, and immediately it's taken care of. So on the question of the camps themselves, every effort is being made to ensure that there are no armed forces or armed security elements inside of the camps. On the question of screening, the main screening site remains at a location called Hammam al-Alil. That is south of Mosul. It's a very large area. There's a screening site there. And in fact, there are 7 different emergency sites, all part of the same territory. Some of those sites are run by the government. Some of them are run by the UN. All of the people who come out of Mosul, Western Mosul, all of them are screened at Hammam al-Alil. The United Nations is present in Hammam al-Alil. We are able to see where the screening takes place. The men, when they come into Hammam al-Alil, all go to the screening area. They proceed up to desks where the screening takes place, and the UN is in that particular compound. Now, what's happened in the last several weeks is that in Western Mosul, as more and more areas are retaken by the security forces, a number of additional screening sites have been established. Many of these sites are established. We learn about them the next day. In all cases where we are aware that new screening sites have been established, the UN has been allowed to go into these areas. Right now, when I was describing the mustering points, the 3 on the western side of the river and the 2 on the eastern side, there are screening sites connected to most of those mustering points, and we will be there. One of the important aspects of the Mosul operation, and if you allow us to be frank, and again, we're calling that a year ago right now, there was the operation in Fallujah. There were irregularities in screening during the Fallujah operation. These were widely reported on. The government conducted investigations into those irregularities, and it's been one of our major areas of engagement and advocacy and discussion with the government to encourage them, ask them to ensure that all screening henceforth is done appropriately. As I said, 774,000 people have left Mosul since the operation started. Almost all of those people have been screened. We understand that there have been some concerns, but certainly not at the level or to the degree that happened in the early days of Fallujah.
Majid?
Thank you, Farhan. Ms. Grande, thank you very much again for this briefing. And I have 4 short questions, and if Farhan allows me for that, as an Iraqi journalist.
Ask a couple of questions now, and then we'll see whether we have time for more after.
4 short questions, but please feel free to give me long answers. The first one is there are Iraqi generals that are talking about June 10 as a date to fully control Mosul, as it is the 3rd anniversary of the fall of the city into the eyes of ISIS. How do you feel about that intensification of the operation, and how is that impacting your work? And my second question is about if you have any update about the rescued Yazidi girls since the last time we spoke. And the other one is, I want to go to talk about Hawija. Is there any humanitarian plans going on right now? Because the Prime Minister is saying after Mosul, we are going for Hawija.
Thank you for those questions. It's very nice to see you again. On the issue of when Mosul will be done, one of the key, I think very important aspects of the government's communication is that they've said throughout the entire operation it will take as long as it takes. And the pacing of the operation will depend upon the steps we as security forces have to take to ensure the protection of civilians. What that means is that they have to go slower to ensure that civilians are protected, and they will go slower. I think it's very clear that the pause in the fighting in February and March was directly linked to the use of airstrikes and the fact that there were a number of casualties and the use of artillery. The security forces accepted that there were very high casualties, and they slowed down the operation in order to make sure that civilians were not being put at disproportionate risk. My understanding from our engagement with the military is that the length of the battle will depend upon how hard the resistance is from ISIL. When the renewed offensive started on Thursday in those 3 northern neighborhoods just north of the old city, on the first day of fighting, basically the security forces were able to advance only just a little bit. The fighting was so intense. It may be that way all the way through the old city. If it is, my sense is that this could take a number of weeks, if not longer, a number of months. Again, what's been very important is that the military operation has been paced against civilian protection. And just to underline why this is so important to us as humanitarians is that doesn't happen very often. Usually the pace of military operations is based on military imperatives, and it's based on political imperatives. And what is very important about the Mosul operation is that the Iraqi security forces have said our operation will be paced on what it takes in order to protect civilians. And this is the very important significance of the humanitarian concept of operations that the forces adopted and have been adhering to. On the issue of the Yazidi girls, we did issue a press statement several weeks ago when 36 of the Yazidi girls were rescued and were brought to the United Nations, where we are providing them with specialized support and assistance as they reintegrate back into their families and communities. I can share with you that since the Mosul operation started, nearly 1,000 girls have been brought to safety. If you appreciate, we're very careful about sharing additional details, given that many of these girls are coming out from areas that are still held by ISIL. I can also share that the difficulties of reintegrating the girls back into their families and communities cannot be underestimated. And then finally, on the question of Fallujah, yes, we are in advanced contingency planning and expectation that the Fallujah operation will start. I was just counting the number of camps that we have established. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 8 emergency camps that are being constructed right now in anticipation of the humanitarian impact of Fallujah, which, as you said, we expect is likely to start after Mosul is retaken.
Matthew?
Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. I wanted to know, one, could you give an update on the Mosul Dam? Some people are saying that the danger has passed. Some people have said that it's still at risk. And also, you may have seen there was a long Wall Street Journal article about France working with the Iraqi security forces to try to target French nationals who may be fighting with ISIS. And it basically seems to allege either extrajudicial killings or a sort of an attempt to make sure that these people die in Iraq and don't return to France. I wonder what the role of the UN in Iraq is. Are you aware of that? Are you monitoring that? What do you think of that? Thanks a lot.
Matthew, nice to see you. On Mosul Dam, I'm actually a hydrologist, and I know in previous briefings we've talked about Mosul Dam before. The Mosul Dam is going to be secure when the chambers, the grouting chambers, have been reinforced, and when the cavity that's underneath the grouting chamber is fully reinforced. And then the curtain itself, this is a curtain dam, the curtain itself has to be reinforced. That has not yet happened, and until it happens, there's still the possibility of a catastrophic outburst. So work is ongoing on the dam. That's very important, but all three of those things have to happen. The cavity underneath the curtain has to be reinforced, the gallery or the grouting chamber has to be reinforced, and the curtain itself has to be. Until that's done, there is still the possibility that there could be an outburst from the dam. Matthew, on the issue of the report that you just referred to, I've just seen that in the press ourselves. We do not have any insight into that issue at the moment.
Again? Okay, one more.
Thank you for. I have a follow-up about the Mosul Dam. The Iraqi government, as you're probably aware, has a contract with the Italian company to reconstruct the dam, and it will expire by the end of this year, I believe. And there is not much. Baghdad refuses to extend that contract. How concerned are you about this, since there is no alternative for that company's contract? And my second question is about there are already talks about reconstruction plans for Iraq and for Mosul after Mosul. Are you aware of any details about that? How those plans are going? How serious is the Iraqi government basically in implementing those plans? Thank you. Thank you very much.
On the issue of the contractual status, the Italian contract, forgive me, I am actually not familiar with the terms of that contract. Again, the really important point is that the dam is going to be stabilized when the cavity is reinforced, the chamber is reinforced, and the curtain is reinforced. All of those things have to happen before we can all have confidence that the dam will be fully stabilized. On the issue of reconstruction plans, the government is finalizing a 10-year reconstruction plan that covers the 7 provinces that have been most impacted by ISIL. Their intention is to present that reconstruction plan at an international reconstruction conference, which is likely to be held in the next several months. We have seen the plan. It's a very sensible plan. It envisions the rehabilitation of the key grids, the electricity grids, sewage grids, water grids. It includes sections for damaged housing, repairing those. It also includes sections for public infrastructure like housing, like schools and hospitals, and the revitalization of key sectors of the economy, including the energy sector and the agricultural sector. I would be frank that this is not an overly ambitious plan, and the drafts that we've seen make a lot of sense. Once the plan is done, the government will be doing a damage and loss assessment. This is quite a technical process where they evaluate what it will cost to repair the grids, the houses, and to revitalize the commanding heights of the economy. It will be on the basis of the damage and loss assessment that the actual cost of the plan will be derived. At this point, the government can't really say how much it will cost to reconstruct because they haven't done the damage and loss assessment. That has to come first, And when it is done, costing can proceed.
Thank our guest, Lise Grande, the Deputy Special Representative for UNAMI. Thanks a lot for another very informative briefing. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.